Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming and getting up after Proof of Rakia last night. So I'm Brenda. I'm one of the co-founders of Tellor, and today I'm going to be talking to you about long-tail assets, why they're important, and how we can use them responsibly. A lot of these blue chip assets that we see today, they were able to evolve in a state where the whole ecosystem was small enough to support them or their growth as everything grew. And so as we implement new long-tail assets or new assets, created assets, new shitcoins or whatever you want to call them, we have to create this mechanism for them to also grow. We need to nourish them. Otherwise, we're going to end up with like 3 or 4 very centralized stable coins or very few assets, which go against everything that we set out to do, right? We want to have diversification, we want to have decentralization, and that includes the assets and the things that we create within the ecosystem. And I want to talk a little bit of something that just happened last week with Avalanche Euler. There was apparently a manipulation of the asset, and people, immediately, most of the time, they blame the oracles. We're an oracle, and we deal with this all the time, right? As oracle providers, it is important to understand that there are different layers of what we're trying to provide and how we can make it secure. There are so many things with what is discussed here. For starters, I want to dissect a little bit of what happened. Somebody put in, or Jared from Subway apparently put in a trade in a curve pool for 210K USDT to buy DEUSD, and they ended up moving the price. That ended up triggering an update to the Oracle that Oracle pushed around to different networks, and then that led to liquidating about 534K in assets. And to me, that is the biggest problem, right? The problem here is that the cost of attack was way lower than the gain of the attack. So no matter what you're doing, if that's the case, you're going to have a hack or an attack. You're gonna experience this, no matter how you do it, how you structure things. And so, as a protocol, and as a user of a protocol, when you use them, you're actually agreeing to the risk of these markets. And so, if you cannot calculate the cost of attack, I can guarantee you there is a hacker out there that is calculating it for you. So, in this case, the guy went on discussing, I forget his name, Omer Goldberg, on discussing like what happened, but he doesn't actually go back to the actual problem, underlying problem. And this is like, it's the market for DEUSD. As you can see, there's about 66% of that market, it's within a curve pool. There is no magical thing that any oracle can do to prevent asset manipulation when this is the market that you created. This market is so small too. If you look at the volume, it's very small. It's ripe for somebody to come in and take advantage of it. And so blaming the oracle for this is, I think, one, unjust, and also a little bit irresponsible. It's sort of like scapegoating and just choosing the oracle. But let's talk a little bit more about how we can actually create or use these assets in a more secure way. We have to first understand that there are several layers of security that come in anytime that you want to use any type of asset, but specifically for long-tail assets or low TVL or low liquidity, you have to make sure that you have all of these layers in place so that you can protect your users. I don't know how many of you guys have ever designed your own protocol or help with design, but I can guarantee you, no matter at what level of your protocol you're in, if there is a hack, you will be affected. If there is a hack, it's always, it's not just the company that suffers, but all of its employees might even end up without jobs. So it's all of our jobs to make sure that everything is as secure as possible. The first layer of security for any type of assets that you're using is actually coming up with a definition of what you want to use in your protocol. Many times people come to us and they're just like, well, I need the price of Ethereum or I need the price of Bitcoin. It's like, cool, but the most important thing is how are you actually using it? Which price do you need? How do you want it aggregated? How does this affect your protocol directly? And so a lot of times when people just want to use something that is out there, maybe, I know we push some prices on chain that people can use without really requesting them, and Chainlink does the same thing, and other oracles do the same thing. And people decide to use these price feeds, even though they don't really understand what's the underlying mechanism that is being used to aggregate or provide this information. So the very first thing that you need to do is, as a protocol, what is the proper definition? Is there enough liquidity for this asset to create a market that can support it? If there isn't, is there a type of aggregation that can improve my security? And data sources, obviously, they come from where is this asset listed? And you might have like 10 supposed data sources from like market cap or CoinGecko, but if they're all coming from the same one pool, people are gonna know that that is the weakest link and the best point of attack. So that is the very first layer that you have to address as a protocol. No matter what oracle you choose, you're going to have to be able to provide this information, and they're going to, hopefully, they're asking you these questions. And then after that, the oracle rarely, very rarely, unless it's a bad implementation of the actual oracle, gets hacked. I looked through Rect website, through different hacks that had happened, at least for all of 2023 and 2024. The majority of the hacks do not happen at the Oracle protocol level. They happen at the asset manipulation level. That's why it's so important. And that's why, honestly, at this point, I feel like you have such a broad range of oracles that they can do the job of providing the information. You can also use CK for some of this stuff. But the third level of security falls within your protocol and how you use information, right? Or how you use this information, how you settle. Some protocols have long implemented fallbacks, like freezing the system when something goes haywire, or using a delay to actually use the incoming information. But all of these things you have to think about when you're designing your system. Once the hack happens, if you don't have all of these things in place, it doesn't matter what you do. So that's the fourth layer of security is what are your system fallbacks? You have to be able to address an oracle failure, an oracle dying maybe. They disappear, you don't get any information, or you get bad data. All of these fallbacks have to be within your system, only because ultimately if you get hacked, you're going to be the one that's going to be responsible and going to have to go and do a postmortem afterwards. You want to make sure that your users are as secure as possible. Also, with all of these different ecosystems growing, anytime you go and deploy maybe on Cosmos or on Ethereum or some other L2 or some other ecosystem that you decided fits your needs, you are also taking on the risk of that chain or of that ecosystem. One odd hack that happened last year was the Levana protocol. They are deployed on Osmosis chain, and if you guys remember Black Thursday, when Ethereum crashed and everybody was trying to liquidate their positions, and there was a huge congestion on Ethereum, gas costs were really, really high, so the oracles couldn't update the information as fast as possible, and so then a bunch of liquidations ended up happening. That happened in 2023. 2023? No, 2020. Anyway, 2020, I think. And then in 2024, they recreated that same attack, but on Osmosis chain, on the Levana protocol. And the attackers, they basically created the congestion, so they knew when the Oracle updates were going to happen, and they were able to make money off of it. So when you are deploying, wherever it is that you're deploying, you are also taking the risk of that ecosystem. So you have to make sure that you build for it, because it can happen. And like I said, it's happened to Levana protocol. It's going to happen to other protocols, I'm sure, in the future. But also, if you decide to do your own dApp chain, how do you handle these changes? Are you going to build lanes for certain type of transactions? These are all questions that you have to address before you actually deploy. And it's part of this layered approach to security. And then the last resort, I think, it's always your social layer. You have to be able to, if everything falls, something happens, and you're lucky enough that you do have a pause button, then how do you go back and make things right? Do you have a governance system behind it? Do you just fork the chain and update your chain and update address balances? How are you going to approach this within your own community? Because whenever, at least in my experience, whenever we design a system, you design it to do whatever you think the community wants, and then you have all these disclosures. This is how this works. This is how the risk that you're taking on when you're using this protocol. When an attacker comes, they basically break the rules, right? That's not what you intended to do. So how do you make sure that your community says, okay, this is the way and the path that we're going to go from now on? So all of those layers of security are what's going to keep you secured. One of the most recent examples of that is Hyperliquid. They had also like a hack, and they went back and they're like, nope, we're going to update our Oracle, and I think they even made money off of it. But I can guarantee you, they're not going to get hacked anytime soon, because they know that they're not going to make as much money as they think they could. But with that said, basically, for long-tail assets, right now we've built an ecosystem that very much supports most blue chip for Collateral, and it's not going to allow us to expand and experiment if that is the only type of collateral that we're able to use. We need to create an environment where other collateral can also grow to become as strong as some of the ones that we already have. And for that, obviously, we have to implement oracles properly and implement these layers of security that guarantee the safety of our users. Oracles are super important because we want to provide prices as fast as possible, but we also don't want to provide prices in a way that they can be manipulated, so they're very difficult. And they're the ones that drive liquidation. Like basically, if you get a bad Oracle price, you can have a really bad effect on your system. I'm not going to go through liquidation example because I'm running out of time, but this is the example of Black Thursday with a flash crash, or with a crash on Ethereum. This is an example where maybe we would have been, we really wanted to update prices as quickly as possible. We didn't want to use stale prices, but because of the congestion of the system, we ended up having this bad outcome. This is actually an example of when we actually probably could have been okay with slower updates because we had the USDC depeg that came from something that wasn't even happening on the crypto world, right? It came from the Silicon Valley Bank and Silvergate and all of these banks that in the US were basically our off-ramps. They were being shut down, basically. And so that caused a little bit of chaos in terms of people thinking they needed to get out of these positions into other assets because they maybe couldn't take the money out. And even though it was I think only 8% of USD for USDC was in one of these banks, it ended up having a really big effect. I think it went down to 88 cents or something like that, the USDC. So this is the choice that we face generally, where we want really fast oracles because we don't want stale prices, but then we don't want assets that can be easily manipulated. And so where do we find the balance? Or we just have to determine what are the trade-offs that we are willing to make. And we need to stop pretending that there are no oracle risk. Everything from the liquidity of the assets to the smart contracts being able to fail, and not being able to really drive whether all the time completely be sure that we need a fast oracle or a slow oracle. And for DeFi to stay competitive, we have to find better ways to collateralize. We're already very capital inefficient in comparison with TradFi. But low liquidity, long tail assets are really tough, no matter how you put them. But it's also a very good example of why we need to move forward from how we have been treating these assets as somebody else's problem. You come to the oracle and you're like, well, I need this, and we just are supposed to be magical and make liquidity appear for an asset that doesn't have it. It's not going to happen, right? So even if you do a traditional oracle does not address this problem. Native pricing with AMMs or TWAPs, you're going to either have a stale price or you're going to have a highly manipulatable asset or feed. Alternate designs, you either put the users at, I guess, they get to decide what they want to do, or you just, set the price of USDC to 1. It's also not ideal, because things can depeg. So we need to really start thinking about how do we address this as a whole, instead of, this is compartmentalized in this one area. The oracle does not guarantee that the asset will not be manipulated. And if you do have an asset that can be manipulated, then you do have to address it within your own ecosystem. Otherwise, we're not providing an environment for all of these assets to actually grow to become those blue chip that we do want to have, and that we want to have as diversified assets as possible and continue to grow as an industry. Otherwise, we're going to hit a top, and then that's going to be it. We need space to actually experiment. There are a few things that you can do within your own protocol. You can, do some volume limits. You can do some auto liquidation models. You can do, depending on how you're using the prices, you might actually, instead of using the average, you might, for some type of liquidations, you might want to use the highest price seen on the market versus the lowest price seen on the market. You can get very creative with these things, but it has to go back to, a lot of Athena or Morpho. They're great, but they're really just blue chip asset, right? Because they're not designed to be able to handle these high risk markets with better fallbacks. So yeah, you could, for Morpho, use any ERC20, but is it designed to actually use it? I don't think so, It's designed for things that are a little bit more, quote unquote, stable. And so we need to do better if we want to actually grow and expand as an industry as a whole. And for long tail assets, that means actually providing an environment where they can actually grow over time with us. And that's the end of my time. But if anybody has any questions, happy to.
Okay, let's give Brenda a big applause. We can start the Q&A session, so if anybody has a question, please raise your hand. We have a question right over there.
Thanks, that was a great talk. I'm wondering whether some of the problems you described could be found with economic simulations. For instance, you could see if have a very small pool, then something bad will happen.
You're talking just running simulations before you actually feed the price.
I just try to experiment, like if I have a small pool and something bad happens, how the prices are going up or down, who loses the money.
Yeah, I mean, you should definitely, yeah, you should be able, or you should be able to run those simulations. In essence, that is part of knowing what is the cost of attack of your system or the asset that you are providing a market for. Does it completely address it? I don't know. I think it depends on how you structure your system. Like if you know that something is really ripe for manipulation because low TVL or low liquidity, maybe what you want to do is for that specific market, you have limits. You have some caps for changes or some caps for losses and gains, and that could potentially take the attackers like, okay, maybe it's not enough money, it's not worth the hassle. But ultimately, it has to go back to, you can do all of these simulations off-chain, and even if you, before you feed the price or something, but ultimately you're gonna end up like, is the price gonna be stale after you go run all these simulations, and then you're submitting an older price than necessary, or is your system fine with taking that trade-off? And that is fine too. Because once you disclose it to users, they know what risk they're taking. And I think that is the fairest thing that you can do. As long as they know their risk, they know what they're signing up for. And I say this, very, very lightly. I know that a lot of users don't really know what the hell is going on in the protocol, to be honest, and don't really care. They just, heard from their friend that they made money, and then they're trying to follow their strategy, and and then they lose money, and everybody complains, and then you go and ask them, but did you actually? No, they don't care. As a company, I think it makes it very, very difficult because you have to make all of these disclosures and tell them this is your risk and this is what's happening behind the curtains. And they still may not listen, and then they go and do a big splash when something happens. But I think as a community, because most of us here are builders, if we address it with all of these layers, where we're taking everything into consideration, from the data definition, which seems a lot of times unimportant, but it is so important, to how you handle the actual attack or the aftermath of an attack, then you actually have a secure system, a fully secure system. It doesn't make it unbreakable, but at least you have a plan.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Then let's give a big applause.
Thank
you, Brenda.
you.